Welcome to Liesl's Artistic Studio. The summer months can be so much fun, but they also can get really busy. However, I think it's still important to make time for painting. So instead of painting anything super detailed and intense, I've decided to create a few fun, simple, and easy pieces for us to paint over the next few weeks. So for today's supplies, we need a piece of watercolor paper, and we'll go over the simple drawing outline that's on this in just a minute. Now, I don't usually paint square pieces of artwork, so today we're going to give that a try. I've just cut my paper to be an 8-inch by 8-inch size, but feel free to use whatever size you'd like. Then I've got some watercolor paints. We'll be using a very limited color palette today, only 2 colors actually. Then we'll need some clean water, a paper towel, a pencil for our outline drawing, and then some brushes. I'll be using 3 different brushes today. These are some that will be available in my upcoming personally designed Craftimo set that will soon be available for purchase. I've got a number 10 round, a number 6 round, and lastly, a number 1 rigger or liner brush. Now, these specialty brushes of mine will only be for sale for a limited time, so there's only a limited amount of sets for sale. If you're interested in purchasing a set in the future when they come out, I do actually have a link right now in the description of this video, along with links of the other products you'll see me using today, that will take you to my Craftimo brush product page. And then when you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a big orange button that you can click on so you can be notified as soon as these brushes are available for purchase. Then if you scroll down just a little bit more, you can actually read my About the Artist paragraph also. It's just kind of fun if you'd like to get to know me a little bit better. There are also a few other details about the brushes themselves. So there you go. Okay, let's really quickly go over the drawing outline for this painting. And don't be too nervous about this, it really is pretty simple today. However, I will have a more detailed outline for sale on my Etsy shop as well if that is easier for you. I'll leave a link for that in the description of this video. So we'll start by drawing a circle on our page for the center area of the flower. I'm drawing this in more of the bottom area of the page. You can do it in the bottom center if you'd like. I think mine is slightly more off to the right side. I am sort of planning to paint this painting with a slightly asymmetrical look. Now the next part is just simply drawing some petals on here. You can do as many as you like. I'll probably do about 6 today. There's nothing too special about these. I'm just starting at the center circle, drawing up and out, making the center area a little thinner or close together in size, and then spreading it wider at the ends of the petals. To add a little bit of interest to these petals, I am making them a little more jaggedy at the ends as well, but of course that is optional. Next, around the center circle, I'll draw in some quick lines that go all the way around for the stamen. And lastly, I'm just going to pencil in a few lines around the flower that I'm thinking of putting maybe some little branches or twigs or leaves or even just some splatter marks. I like to pencil these in because it gives me a better idea of how my composition is going to go, and it also gives an allowance to make mistakes and erase them before it's more permanent with the paint. But you really could leave these out and just freehand painting this part later if you'd rather. Okay, I'm going to tape my paper down using some artist tape just to help prevent some warping, and we'll be ready to pull out the paints. Now, a while back, I did a tutorial where I painted this piece that really featured the color black, which is something I don't do very often, but I had so much fun with it, and I thought it turned out striking. So I decided I need to feature black again in this painting today. So the only 2 colors we'll be using today are pink and black. For my pink, I will be using my favorite go-to pink color, Quinacridone Rose. Of course, you can use whatever you have on hand. And then we'll just start painting with this pink and pull out the black in a little bit. Now, I actually want this to be a little bit lighter in value today, so it really stands out against the dark black. So I'm just adding a little bit of extra water to this pink color here to lighten it up. But you can test out your color on a scrap piece of paper to help you gauge this, if it's too dark or if it's too light, and then adjust it as needed. Then with my lovely number 10 round brush, I'll take some water and paint this first petal with just water first, and then I'll add in the color to the wet space later. This is known as the wet on wet technique. Now you'll notice I still had a little bit of pink color in my brush, so my water is a little bit tainted, but you know what, that's okay since I will just be adding some more pink to this. So after this space is all wet, take a bit of this pink paint and start applying it to this outside edge of the petal first. This is where I really want the darkest color to be, and then I will spread it out just a tiny bit to create a dark to light gradient of color. But really, I'm just kind of letting the water do the work for me here. I'm guiding the paint a little bit, but I'm going to let the water and paint just freely blend together how it wants to for the most part. Then if you ever find you've got too much color on here, take a paper towel and gently dab out some of that color or water while it's still wet. All right, let's move on to the next few petals, painting them in this exact same way. If you're enjoying my painting and teaching style tips and techniques, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss out on more of my new and upcoming weekly tutorials. You know, I think I'm actually going to change things up just a little bit here and add just a touch more of some darker or more concentrated paint on these last three petals. My idea is to have some of the black paint be surrounding or touching more of the first three, so having them lighter really sets them off. But these last three won't have quite so much black next to them, so this darker pink right at the edge will really get them to stand out better next to the more white background. All right, that's pretty much it for the pink at the moment. So now let's get some of the black on our tray next. The black I'm using is Ivory Black. Now, still using this number 10 round, I'll start spreading some water off to the right side of this flower where I sort of want the black background or color to spread. Now, make sure your pink flower is completely dry before starting this step though, or you may end up with a black flower. Now, you'll want to work fairly quickly here so the water doesn't start to dry before you can get the paint on here. So let me show you something that I'm doing to help make this a little quicker. You'll see that I'm not trying to paint right up against the flower with the water just yet. I'm getting close, but I'll reserve the tiny, more detailed spots for when I actually start applying the color. Now you'll also notice that my water is slightly tainted again, but that doesn't bother me. In fact, I actually did it on purpose for two reasons. One, it helps you as the viewer to be able to see better where I'm placing the water. And two, this is just going to add another level or layer to my painting. I'm planning to have some of this light gray actually showing around the edges, and then I'll focus the darker black more on the inner parts, once again creating sort of a gradient of color. Then after I've got my water placed on the page here, I'll actually switch over to the smaller number 6 round to paint the black in. This is so I can get into some of the smaller spaces a little bit easier. I'll start painting the black closest to the edge of the flower petals and in between them in some of the small cracks. I really want to keep the darkest value of black right up against the flower. And then with a little bit of help from the brush and the water already on the page, I'll let it blend and flow outward a ways. This is the time to push that black paint right up against the pink to make it more defined. All right, well done. As a side tip, if you ever find some of these edges are a little too harsh or sharp, you can dab at them with your paper towel and get some of that paint off. But if your paint is already dry like mine is, you can use your brush and some clean water and scrub at that edge just a little bit, then use your paper towel to lighten or soften that color up. I don't mind having a few hard lines in here. I'm just going to soften up a couple of spots to add some variety to the background. While I do this though, I want you to notice how this dark black is really making this half of the flower pop off the page. I'm loving this effect. Now down in this little bottom section, I'm going to spread this black paint through the little crack in between the petals, and then I'm going to start forming some shapes stemming out. These are sort of shaped like two little leaves with some nice points at the tips, but I'm almost thinking of them more as like some splatters or smears. In other words, they are not perfectly leaf looking. They're a little more loose, a little more organic. In fact, the next 3 I paint on here will probably be even more splatter looking. I'm just painting these along the lines that I drew at the beginning of this tutorial. You have the freedom here to just be a little creative. If it's easier for you to just paint a leaf, then that is totally fine. Or you can be a little more free and abstract with the look, sort of like what I'm doing. I'll make a few more loose leaf splatter shapes here on the left top corner of the flower, but then I'm actually going to start transitioning a little bit to some more realistic looking leaves, spreading out back and forth along the pencil line that I'd previously drew. I will also gradually start painting them smaller as I get closer to the top. Now, in just a little bit, I'm going to add some splatters to this piece, but for some extra fun, I'm actually going to paint in a few larger splatters that are a little more controlled as to how big they are, where they're placed, and how many I want. Those look good for now. I'll probably decide to do some more later, but this is a good start. All right, I'm kind of liking this asymmetrical look I've got going on, the more blurred and full background color off to the right side, and the crisp splattered leaf silhouettes to the left, but I think I'm going to tie this piece together a little bit by adding a few blobs of black color that can be a little leaf or a plant or a bud that's off to the right side now, and maybe even a few grassy lines at the bottom too. That's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and start painting in the center of the flower now, just using the number 6 brush and some black paint. And to give this an extra added bit of dimension and detail, I'm going to leave a few spots of white paper showing for an accent or highlight. Okay, we're getting close to being done. Just a couple of steps left. Let's switch over to the nice thin rigger or liner brush now and paint in some thin lines. I'll make a few thin lines on the outside surrounding the flower for an extra element of fun, sort of like their little twigs or branches or something. And then I'll paint in the stems on the two leafy plants or branches of leaves. You know, even though you can paint these thin lines with just the tip of a smaller brush, like a number 6, for example, even if it has a nice pointy tip, you really have to have a light touch and a steady hand. The reason a rigger or liner comes in so handy is because it's really hard to mess up these thin lines. In fact, it's almost impossible to paint these lines thick with a brush like this, and so it leaves less room for error if you're really wanting some delicate, thin lines like I'm looking for today. All right, I'm noticing I have some touches of black in between all of the petals except these two here. So I'm going to add just a touch of color here really quickly, and then we'll move on to painting some thin lines around the black center circle for the flower stamen. Again, I'm just keeping these lines nice and thin. They are all going to be fairly close to the same size in length, but I don't want them to be all exactly the same. So I will have some stretch out a little longer or a little shorter than the norm. I also find it's best to paint these lines starting at the edge of the flower center and then pulling that line outward. Now, to add in a fun element of detail, let's paint a few dots on some of the ends of these stamen lines. I'm not going to do it on every single one, mind you, just a few here and there to give it a little bit of flair. While we're in the mood of making lines still, let's add in one more little detail to this flower and mix up a little bit of black into some of this pink that we were using earlier to create sort of a purplish color. And then we'll paint on a few vein lines on our flower petals. Now we don't want these to be too dark or stand out too much, so keep the color lighter by adding in some extra water. I'll paint a few longer lines stemming out from the center of the petal, but I'll also do just a few shorter ones stemming from the edges of the petal moving into the center a little ways. I find that it's the details like this or the dots on the stamen that really make a good painting a great one. All right, for the final finishing touch to this piece, let's add a few splatter marks to the background. Now, I don't want them to get on my pink flower though, so I'll use this extra piece of paper that I drew on earlier to cover up my flower before I start throwing the paint on here. Then I'll load up my number 6 round with some of this black paint and simply tap it against another brush until some splatters start to form on my page. You can do as many or as few as you'd like and wherever you feel like they're needed. I'm going to come back in here really quickly and paint in a few larger dots of color with my number 6 just to add a good variety of splatter sizes. And then we can call this painting done. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you had some fun with this piece. If you did enjoy this tutorial, please consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to help you discover your artistic side.